Rescue workers pull a 95-year-old woman to safety in the city of Wollongong, south of Sydney. Torrential rain along Australia's east coast has turned roads into rivers and forced thousands of people to evacuate their homes.
We ask the community to continue to be vigilant. This is a highly dynamic situation. These events are moving exceptionally quickly, as was witnessed in the Illawarra this morning, where we saw in the space of about 3/4 of an hour significant downpours, significant flash flooding.
Intense rainfall in the state of New South Wales has caused repeat floods for months. Several towns are still battling to clear debris. Australia's East Coast summer has been dominated by the La Niña weather phenomenon, typically associated with increased rain.
Unfortunately, we continue to be in a La Niña event, which we know for New South Wales means that we can expect to see higher than average rainfall conditions, which is exactly what we've seen over the past couple of months. And we are expecting La Niña to continue throughout the remainder of April.
The extreme weather made worse by climate change has raised questions about how prepared Australia is for such disasters, and authorities are warning of more rain in the coming days. Major flood warnings have been issued for several suburbs in the south of Sydney, while the entire city of 5 million people has been warned of potential flash flooding this weekend.
It's rainy season in the Amazon, normally a time when logging activities and fires decrease. Yet deforestation has been on the rise. During the first 3 months of this year, 941 square kilometers of the Brazilian rainforest were destroyed, 64% more than the same period in 2021. Official data just released shows first quarter deforestation at its most extensive since 2015. It's the result of illegal logging and mining, but environmentalists also blame Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro.
We know that this is a consequence of several of the anti-environmental policy that has been implemented by the current government since it took office in 2019. So the surveillance activities were drastically reduced. There is no action plan to fight deforestation. There are several bills that actually send the wrong message that the people who do environmental crime will not be punished. On the other hand, they might be benefited with a change in the current regulation. So all of this leads to a scenario in which deforestation rates are out of control again.
Bolsonaro is pushing for legislation that will open indigenous lands to mining.
Thousands of representatives of more than 170 indigenous tribes are now in the capital, Brasilia, protesting against a set of bills which will make it easier for miners, loggers, and farmers to commercially exploit the Amazon.
From January to March, deforestation in indigenous lands increased by 52% compared to the same period last year. Environmentalists say this is particularly concerning because those areas should be protected, whereas today, the opposite is true.
The village of Dmitrievka is recovering from a month-long siege by Russian forces. It was a front line in the battle for the capital, Kiev, and the wounds are still raw.
Thank God we survived. We lived here by the forest where all the houses were bombed, where everything was burned. That's where we lived. We were bombed 24 hours without stopping. We never thought that we can survive here in this village. We survived Armageddon. Stalingrad. This is Stalingrad.
As the Russian forces tried to withdraw, they were ambushed by waiting Ukrainian artillery. Heavy fighting continued for almost 24 hours here on this road just outside Dmitrievka. Severely shelled, a column of Russian tanks and personnel carriers were wiped out. Many soldiers remained inside, now barely recognizable. Those who survived the fight were captured. A video showing the killing of one of the prisoners of war has since emerged, which has caused outrage. Right here, the Ukrainian forces captured 2 Russian soldiers. One of them was still alive and gasping. Then a soldier shot the man twice, and after the man kept moving, the soldier shot him again and the man stopped. The killings happened around March 13th, while a Russian column was retreating from the area. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry said the destruction of a Russian convoy here was precise work. However, the video shows a more complicated reality.
Russian.
Colonel Bogdan was a soldier for 42 years before he retired. When the war started, he took up arms again. He questions the video's authenticity.
This video was edited. When we get prisoners, we detain and trade them for Ukrainians. We are not barbarians. We don't shoot prisoners.
While Ukrainian officials allege Russian forces are committing war crimes against civilians in the region, now they face similar accusations. They are promising to investigate.
For everyone who died in this war, Russians and Ukrainians, one person bears the responsibility, Vladimir Putin. And even if, possibly, our armed forces made some violations which led to the death of people, still Putin is responsible. It is not us who started the war, but him. As for the rest, it requires a personalized approach, case by case.
But according to the Geneva Conventions,
According to the Geneva Conventions, не должно было быть.
This war shouldn't have happened.
Even by the standards of this war's brutality, this was a shocking attack, with Ukrainian civilians bearing the brunt. The station at Kramatorsk was crowded with passengers, among them many women and children, trying to get a train to take them to safety.
Everyone was panicking. People were screaming and crying. Then I saw a wounded woman. She was bleeding heavily.
Parts of a missile lay nearby. At the Lviv railway station in the west, the end of a journey that's taken well over 24 hours, travelling almost the length of Ukraine from Kramatorsk in the east. This train set off well before Friday morning's attack, bringing people who, like the victims, were trying to escape the escalating fighting. It was a very bad situation, Liena tells us. All the time there was shelling and bombing. What will you do now in Lviv, we ask. I've no idea, she says. Just to get out was the main thing. And she heads off with her children, not knowing where. In the town of Bashtanka in southern Ukraine, people arrived to escape battles around Kherson and Mykolaiv. The fighting has continued for weeks and has now moved closer to their homes.
Yesterday they started shelling us. They started destroying the houses and everything with cannons. Then the tanks appeared from the forest, so I decided to leave.
Many displaced people head for the relative safety of western Ukraine. In the early days of the war, Lviv railway station and the western border crossings were overwhelmed with hundreds of thousands of people. As the Russian advance was halted, some refugees started returning. Now they're being advised to leave again. The flow of people through the station has closely followed the course of the war from the start, and with fears of a renewed Russian offensive in the east, Lviv and other cities in the west are now bracing for a surge in people wanting to escape the fighting. Anton and Irina have arrived with their 5 children, escaping fighting in the southeast.
We stay since Russian Federation started bombing our cities. We stay, we wait, but I just make a decision. But the first bomb falling near my house, I take my children and go away immediately.
Yesterday there were 2 missiles shot down near our home, with shrapnel falling outside.
They plan to leave Ukraine. How far? As far away as possible, they say.
As atrocities in Ukraine mount, the country's ambassador appealed to the General Assembly to hold Russia accountable and suspend them from the Geneva-based Human Rights Council.
All you need to do is to press the yes button and to save the Human Rights Council and many lives around the world and in Ukraine. On the other hand, pressing no means pulling a trigger.
Russia, denying all wrongdoing, accused the West of double standards.
What we're seeing today is an attempt by the United States to maintain its dominant position and total control to continue its attempt at human rights colonialism in international relations.
Russia lobbied hard, convincing China to vote against suspension.
Such a hasty move at the General Assembly, which forces countries to choose sides, will aggravate the division among member states, intensify the confrontation between the parties concerned. It is like adding fuel to the fire.
In the end, 23 countries sided with Russia. 93 voted in favor of suspension, but India, Brazil, and South Africa were among 58 countries that abstained, saying an investigation should be concluded first. Mexico also abstained.
I think it creates more polarization.
A country that supported previous resolutions deploring Russia's aggression.
Mexico is in favor of everything that will keep inclusion and dialogue on the table.
Still, the U.S. ambassador who initiated the vote hailed the decision as a victory.
Today, the international community took one collective step in the right direction. We ensured a persistent and egregious human rights violator will not be allowed to occupy a position of leadership on human rights at the UN.
The 47-member Human Rights Council launched an investigation into possible war crimes in Ukraine while Russia was still a member, over Russia's objections. Now it will release its findings without Russia, who, after becoming only the second country to be suspended from the council, announced it was quitting.
This woman, like many others in her suburb of Cherniv, feels forgotten. Forgotten by her government. Forgotten by the media. Forgotten by aid agencies. She can't live in her home anymore. She tells us it was shelled last month by Russian artillery. Naila has no idea how to even tidy up, much less move back in. Anne says that towns like Bucha and Irpin near the capital have received aid, help and attention, while here, nothing.
Perhaps they don't know what happened here. I can't register the damage with the government because I don't have electricity or internet. If I could register, perhaps they might help. But for now, we just have to help ourselves.
The civil administration in Cherniv is overwhelmed, and so community groups have stepped in to help. Where once they sold cars, they now distribute food. And while this might look like a lot of food, it'll be gone in a couple of hours, leaving hundreds outside with nothing. This food distribution point operated throughout the Russian onslaught. When they had food, they would open, but more often than not, they had nothing. Today, though, is a good day. They have at least something to distribute.
Mostly people ask for bread and water, but water less now because they have running water. Canned food is in high demand. In fact, anything edible, they take thankfully.
This man tells us his house was flattened by Russian tanks, and no one has come here to offer help. He trudges over the damage with no clue where to even begin rebuilding. The Russian President Vladimir Putin insists that his forces aren't targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure, but the evidence against that, once again, is overwhelming, and in this village across a large area. And this is where some of the civilians who were also killed are buried. The authorities had to clear part of the woods to make space. These freshly dug graves all bear the same months. March 2022 will be remembered, even if those who survived feel forgotten.
The attack took place in the heart of Tel Aviv, targeting the Ilka bar when it was bustling with customers. The gunman from here escaped to Jaffa, only a few kilometers away, but it took security services about 9 hours to find him and kill him on the spot. And even if Israel's security services had been on high alert, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said what he describes as lone wolf attacks are difficult to stop.
Terrorist attacks without an organizational infrastructure are really a major challenge for the security system, but it will withstand it. Our enemies will look for every crack and take every opportunity to attack us. We are in a difficult and challenging time. This might take time.
Just 10 days ago, the Prime Minister had called on Israeli gun owners to carry their weapons. Since then, applications for new licenses have rocketed, even though rules on firearms remain strict. Civilians can only own one gun and up to 50 bullets. This comes at a time where Israel is inching closer to a political crisis. The Prime Minister's coalition has lost its majority in parliament earlier this week after a member of the Knesset defected. His government is not about to collapse yet, but it's facing a major challenge from Israel's most acute politician. Benjamin Netanyahu is believed to want to make a comeback. This wave of attacks, a perfect storm for the former Prime Minister wanting to reposition himself as Mr. Security. He tweeted, "We are undergoing a wave of terrorism with 4 attacks within a few days. A tough hand and a firm stance is needed to restore peace and security to the citizens of Israel." Bennett pledged there will be no restrictions on Israel's response to this latest security challenge. That is a worry for Palestinians with the holy months of Ramadan underway. One major checkpoint near Jenin was shut down indefinitely. Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank now bracing themselves for more raids, detentions, and possibly fighting and death.
This is a wartime bridge to increase oil supply until production ramps up later this year. And it is by far the largest release of our national reserve in our history. It will provide a historic amount of supply for a historic amount of time, a 6-month bridge to the fall.
Well, the announcement marks the 3rd time in 6 months the U.S. has tapped into its stockpiles. The president has also called for companies to pay fees if they choose not to use oil wells on land they lease from the government. And his promise to speed up the adoption of green energy sources. Biden plans to invoke the Defense Production Act to support the production of batteries like lithium and nickel, among others. Now, other members of the International Energy Agency, or IEA, a watchdog for Western consumer nations, also agreed to release more oil from their reserves. The move comes after the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and its allies, including Russia, said they were sticking to their plan to gradually increase production. That's despite pressure from the U.S. and other nations to boost output more quickly. So, how does the strategic petroleum reserves work, and what does Biden's plan mean for the market? Let's have a look at the figures. The U.S. held 568 million barrels of oil as of March 25th, down from more than 700 million at their peak in 2009. But IEA member countries are required to keep equivalent to 90 days of net oil imports in emergency reserves. For the U.S., that's 315 million barrels, according to RBC Capital Markets. Once the latest release is complete, the nation will have just 70 million barrels in buffer. The release of 1 million barrels of oil a day over 6 months would make up almost 5% of American demand and 1% of global demand. That's while the IEA said last month as much as 3 million barrels a day of Russian oil production would be lost because of U.S. sanctions. Now, Biden's announcement has pushed oil prices to settle lower, but they were still twice the level a year ago. Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil prices, hit $139 a barrel last month after Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. The recent rise in crude prices has led to a jump in gasoline prices in the U.S., with the national average price of a gallon of gas at more than $4, up from almost $3 a year ago.
In response to the United States' global domination of the online realm, China is investing heavily in its cyber forces.
但是可能是中国的这个过去的这种武侠文化里面有一个四两拨千斤的这样的一个典故吧。
Overnight, universities started offering information security. Companies were scrambling to find hackers and security people. So they went from obscurity, doing their passion, to being in demand.
Now, allegations of state-sponsored hacking between the two nations have reached fever pitch.
China's goal, simply put, is to replace the U.S. as the world's leading superpower, and they're using illegal methods to get there.
中国坚决反对和打击包括网络、商业窃密在内的各种形式的黑客攻击活动。
101 East investigates the growing cyber war between the United States and China. China has the most internet users in the world, but at the turn of the millennium, less than 2% of the population had access to the internet. That didn't stop China from entering a cyber war with the world's biggest superpower. Two international events provoked China's first cyber attacks against the US. The first in 1999, on the night of May 7th, during a NATO operation in the former Yugoslavia. US missiles destroyed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade.
要求北约必须对此承担全部责任。
Then in 2001, a collision between Chinese and American military aircrafts resulted in the death of a Chinese pilot. Following these two events, Chinese hackers targeted a symbol of American power, the military. Hackers replaced the content of this US Navy website with patriotic slogans. They read, "China's patriotic hackers will beat down all the hegemonism in the world. All Chinese must be united and fight for the honor of our homeland."
You worked for 14 years as an expert for the US National Security Agency?
13.
13? Okay.
Priscilla Moriucci worked for the US National Security Agency and headed its Asian Cyber Threat Analysis Office.
There certainly were a core group of people in the late 90s and early 2000s, who were involved in what people would sort of call like the US-China hacker wars, right? They were interesting because it was one of the first times in which you had people on the side of one nation state who were sort of using the internet, right, as a tool, to kind of attack and for political retribution or motivations.
The two main groups behind the attacks were the China Eagle Union and the Honker Union of China. We found their websites from more than 20 years ago. This is the homepage of the China Eagle Union, with slogans like "Shield of the Nation and Justice," "My heart is pure and radiant." As well as the Honker Union of China's website, we found the Hackers Union of China, which described itself as the Chinese Hackers Cybersecurity Alliance.
I think it was sort of one of those transition periods in time, right, when Chinese perception of themselves and the role that they were playing and they occupied changed, and that reflected, right, also in kind of cyber operations and the rise of these kind of the Honker Union, right, and these kind of groups who realized that they had a tool, right, the internet, that they knew how to, affect, United States, and they employed it.
In the hacking community, these original hackers were highly respected for their technical skills and their audacity. With a Chinese speaker who asked to be anonymous, we go in search of them. We make a list of the aliases we find. After several weeks of research, we have faces, backgrounds, real names, and even email addresses. Eagle, founder of the China Eagle Union, is described as the godfather of this generation of hackers. And Lion was the leader of the Honker Union of China. We contact all of the hackers we found via secure email. Only one agrees to an interview, Eagle. Under one condition, he doesn't want to show his face.
Why do you wear a mask and glasses?
其实只是因为考虑今天的 interview，我想不用露脸，你们可以叫我 Eagle。第一个是，我是一个在中国就是比较早的这个，然后我有很多一个人的时间。那么，在我接触电脑之后，我可能就被它 computer 这个领域给吸引了。但是可能是中国的这个过去的这种武侠文化里面有一个四两拨千斤的这样的一个典故吧。那我觉得这个 computer hacking 有一点。
How would you describe the hacking culture at the time?
中国互联网上有就是比较活跃的一种主要的交流方式是通过 BBS， 然后所以我大概在97年也做了一个 BBS， 就叫 China Eagle Union， 然后在刚开始这个 BBS 上，当然它不光是谈论技术的话题，很多会谈论一些这个社会性的话题，因为这个时候互联网已经成为，包括也开始接触外面更多的世界，是去做一个这样的这个维护，把这个 BBS 向这方面进一步深入的一个原因。然后01年就是中美经济对撞这个事件，因为我们觉得这个事情是挺憋屈的，信息是由美国的黑客组织这个黑了这个中国的网站，两个当时的这样这个也是这种安全爱好者的这种团体选择去进行一个类似一个报复性的一种表达，我们就也会去黑听一些美国的。
On his website at the time, Eagle issued a call to all Chinese hackers. Action plan against hegemony and for China's unity. Purpose: to issue a warning to all anti-China forces that are trying to divide the country. Method: all available computer means. After the hack on US Navy websites in May 2001, the Chinese government denied all responsibility for the young nationalist hackers. An editorial in the People's Daily, the official newspaper of the Communist Party, declared the attacks illegal, saying, "Attacks and sabotage of websites, whether from American or Chinese hackers, are unforgivable and illegal acts. It's no exaggeration to call it cyber terrorism." A call to order that doesn't surprise former British spy Nigel Inkster.
What can you say about your former job?
I worked in the British Secret Intelligence Service, retiring as Assistant Chief and Director of Operations and Intelligence. Firstly, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like any organization that's not under its control. Sees that as a challenge and as a threat. And secondly, as I said, in practice, some of these patriotic hacker groups was potentially detrimental to China's interests as the party saw them. So for both those reasons, they needed to bring them under control.
In December 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization and became a major player in international commerce. It was a decisive step towards becoming a world power. China also started to exercise more control of the internet and how it was being used by its citizens.
说我们，因为我们其实从02年我们就已经对外宣布说我们不会再做一些这个 hacking 的这个事情了，因为我们其实觉得这个表达抗议已经表达过了，那我们更多的应该放在建设，就是参与到建设中去。另外一个就是，你 BBS 特别的麻烦，后面这个管理起来，那就是因为这个，因为你要管理这个，你要对所有的发言要负责，会有这个对，如果这个发帖里面有谣言或者什么，你要对这个是要去负责任的，所以这是一个管理方面的一个压力。
Eagle disbanded his organization and its members dispersed.
也有一些这个加入了安全公司，那也有一些就是说，我们有些成员后来成为 cyber police。
We had a group of people with the requisite cyber capabilities
who were showing a kind of autonomous disposition to work as they saw it, to put these capabilities to the service of the state. The potential was there, and I think this was seized upon, yes.
We find references to early Chinese state-sponsored cyber attacks in secret US diplomatic cables published by the WikiLeaks website. According to a 2009 cable, the hacker Lion was recruited by a company close to the Chinese military.
美国政府也在后面也是使了一些这个力量，那这个力量就好像之前斯诺登就是现在在俄罗斯的那个斯诺登去揭露一样，用一些这个技术手段。商业战中间都是这些不管怎么样，就大家不能说就是谁都是发展的历史都是刚刚进展。
But for US officials, the cyber war with China is far from over.
There's some belief if you close your eyes to it or appease to it, it's going to go away. And it's not. Waiting until they have more leverage and become more powerful before you have that discussion is a mistake.